Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this Thursday, March 4th edition of ATS Radio. I'm your host, Adam Burke. I'll be joined today by Brad Powers, professional bettor and handicapper over at bradpowersports.com. We'll talk some FBS college football, some FCS college football, and a little bit of college hoops on today's edition of the show. As I've been talking about a week ago, posted the 2021 MLB betting guide over at ATS.io. Make sure you check that out. 30 team previews, all the team and player futures you could ask for. Home Run King future as well, one of my favorite articles that I write year in and year out. That's available in individual webpage form over at the website, ATS.io. You can find that link on my Twitter, at Skating Tripods, or you can also on my Twitter page find a direct download link to the PDF from Google Drive. It's the entire guide, 270 some odd pages worth of that guide. You can get that from my Google Drive, then print that out on the company's dime or whatever you want to do with it. But you can check out the full guide over at ATS.io. Or if you need me to, I could send you a link to download that PDF or just send it as an attachment, skatingtripods@gmail.com, the way to get in touch with me. But also over at the website, picks and predictions across golf, NASCAR, UFC, college basketball, NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball picks coming up very soon here as well. Sportsbook reviews, sportsbook promotions, tons of stuff posted on the daily over at ATS.io for you to check out. You can find all those articles in the ATS app as well, which you can download from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. It's a bet tracker, an odds screen of U.S. sportsbooks, stats database, premium subscription model, and again, articles from the website. So download that ATS app today. With that, we bring on today's guest. That is professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. And Brad, how's it going today, man?
That's going well. How you doing?
Doing very well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. And have to throw this out to the listeners right away. We are recording this on Wednesday afternoons, so there is a chance, and a good one at that some of these FCS lines will have moved that we've discussed on today's show, but we'll try to work in that part of the discussion as we go forward here. But I do want to start with a couple of interesting tweets that you had here on Wednesday, specifically looking at the strength of schedule in college football relative to your power ratings. And you had some pretty interesting things that you said on your Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7 with regards to strength of schedule for 2021.
Yeah, I think some people are going to be surprised by the results. And keep in mind, how do I come up with my strength of schedule rankings? I just do average opponent power rating for each team, while also factoring in where the game is played. So obviously you're getting a couple points extra if you're playing, somebody on the road and whatnot. So teams that play more road games, it's going to be tougher. And obviously teams that play, more Power 5 teams, because your average opponent power rating for a Power 5 team is going to be more than a Group of 5 or an FCS. So if you don't play an FCS team, you don't play many Group of 5 teams, and you play like 9 conference games like the Big 10 and the Pac-12 and the Big 12 do, you're probably going to be more at the top of my toughest schedule. And I think a lot of people would be surprised that out of the top 10 toughest schedules in 2021, again, this is an early set of my power ratings, Stanford is number 1. And to me, it makes a lot of sense. So when I saw my result, first, when I saw Stanford's schedule get announced on Tuesday, I was blown away. I mean, Stanford's the first team in 10 years that they do not play a single Group of 5 or FCS opponents. So they play a schedule of 12 Power 5 opponents. First team in 10 years of college football to do that. And then once I plugged in my power ratings, Stanford came out as the toughest schedule. So they had the toughest. Nebraska, Purdue, Colorado, Georgia Tech all have tough schedules. The teams you won't see in there, I think this would be the biggest surprise, no SEC teams. And I think a lot of it goes to the non-conference scheduling or lack thereof of the SEC. Only play 8 conference games. I actually think the SEC is going to be down this year. And then, a lot of non-conference a team like Arkansas or Kentucky specifically, who has a very weak schedule. And when you look at some of their non-conference games, when 3 or 4 of your games each year are against, literally FCS teams and like bottom 10 teams at the FBS level, that's why you're not at the top of my toughest schedule.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make that distinction that, Stanford, maybe the Pac-12 will be better, maybe the Pac-12 won't be better, but they are playing 12 Power 5 opponents, which is
Yep.
something, as you said, that, nobody's done that in 10 years. So, yeah, that's going to give them a very challenging schedule. And you even mentioned here that Stanford could be an underdog in 10 of their 12 games.
Yeah, and a couple of them are close to pick. I mean, right now, we're just going off my early line projections for every single game. I only have Stanford favored at Vanderbilt. That's the only game. The Kansas State game, basically a toss-up. Maybe a very slight underdog against Cal at home late in the season. At Oregon State could be a short underdog role. I'm down on Stanford this year, so maybe I'm a little negative, but reasonably so considering they lost a lot of guys leaving early for the draft. Only one clear-cut favorite role for Stanford. They'll probably get a little bit more respect in the market where there might be another game where they're favored in. But that David Shaw, who a lot of people question, a lot of the analytics guys they are not big David Shaw fans. He will have his work cut out for him. I'll say right now, Adam, Stanford, if you're looking for, hey, who's Brad Powers going to be playing on and against season win totals, games of the year and whatnot, I'm telling you right now, I'm looking to fade Stanford this year.
Well, that's not exactly a ringing endorsement for Stanford, to say the least, and especially, too, because, this is a team that has kind of struggled a little bit over the last few years after being one of the better teams there in that Pac-12 conference. And I don't think that David Shaw's job is necessarily in question, but we know Scott Frost is on a hot seat in Lincoln. And for Purdue, you sort of wonder about their coaching situation as well. Colorado, of course, with a new head coach last year in Carl Durrell, who actually I think exceeded expectations quite a bit.
Yeah.
The Buffaloes, as you said, the number 4th toughest schedule for you. Georgia Tech, their coaching situation is fine there with the 5th hardest schedule. Arizona, a new head coach. They've got a top 10 difficulty of schedule for you. So that's kind of interesting to follow here, too, is that, I would say 3 of the top 6 teams here solidly have, coaches that are not really working with a whole lot of job security going into this season.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for Scott Frost to finally make a move, I don't see it happening. I really don't. After 2.5 years, I'll say last year's kind of a half season, really disappointing. I don't look for them to make a big jump. I do think he needs to get into a bowl game, but I mean, when you look at Nebraska's schedule, I mean, they are going to, I don't care how much improved they are, they're going to struggle to get to a bowl. I mean, they'll be favored in their first 2 games against Illinois and Buffalo, but then they're at Oklahoma in non-conference schedule. That'll be a likely loss. Michigan State, Northwestern, they can win those games. Even Michigan at home might be winnable. But then, at Minnesota will be tough. Ohio State will be tough. At Wisconsin, Iowa. If I had to set a season win total right now for Nebraska, probably 6.5. And I know that's not going to 6-6 and maybe 7-5 best case scenario is not going to keep the people there in Lincoln very happy.
No, definitely not. And these are important things to start thinking about now that the schedules are out, specifically the conference schedules. And, we're probably a month and a half, I would say.
No, actually, Adam, keep in mind, BetOnline's released them. And, first I questioned it, but it makes a lot of sense. You're going to have a bunch of people betting the NCAA tournament, and they're going to flood in the marketplace. Maybe they win. So how do you hold their money for a long period? Hey, open up some season win totals in college football, because the same people that bet college football, if there's one thing they're going to bet outside of college football, it's probably the NCAA tournament. So I have seen BetOnline the last couple of years release season win totals like a week from today, like March 10th or 11th.
Yeah. And again, like we talk about every offseason, basically, is, the timelines are accelerated across all of the sports here. So that's definitely something that you want to keep in mind and factor into the equation. One thing I do want to ask you about here, we're not going to get political with this at all, but Joe Biden did say that by the end of May, there will be a vaccine available for everybody in the U.S. So when you're looking at home field and kind of looking at, your power rating setup and your projected lines for these games, we're effectively 6 months out from the start of the college football season. It's an unpredictable virus. We know that, but it certainly does seem like we're very much on the right track. Now, are you giving the full home field in the numbers that you're putting together?
No, I'm not. And I don't think I'm ever going back to where I was, in 2019 and prior. Just to put in perspective, I was a little over 3 on average, 1 through 130. Obviously, some Power 5 teams had, weighted into that. But, typically for college football, I was like 3.25. Last year, I was down to 2. Was on average. I mean, a lot of teams only had like 1 or so, and some teams had 3, but depending on crowd and whatnot, and just maybe elevation and some unique circumstances there. But I would say right now I am more towards leaning to whatever I put towards last year's home field, because just pure power ratings for me, I had my best year ever. And I think some of it was I wasn't, giving as much, maybe overcompensate. I certainly wasn't overcompensating for home field last year, but maybe I was in prior years. So I'm not going to go all the way back to where I was. I think, and look, stats prove it. Home field advantage, whether it be the NFL or college football, it just isn't what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's easier to travel. Kids are used to it. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion and something we could talk about more, as the season approaches here. But it is a good point. And, you'll have some people that are kind of saying, oh, well, home field advantage in 2021 may actually be worth more because fans, college students, everybody will be a lot more excited to be back in that environment. And now teams will be going back out on the road where they are playing against, the other team, but also 30, 40, 50, 60,000 plus fans. But like you said, we've seen that home field has less and less of an impact over the last several seasons. So I think it's a really interesting discussion to have as we get a little bit closer here. But as far as what's right in front of us, another week of the FCS. And you and I were talking about this before we started recording here. And again, I will throw this out there for our listeners. We are recording this on Wednesday afternoon. So some of these lines may have moved as people enter into the FCS market. But right now, it doesn't seem like it's taking a whole hell of a lot to move these FCS lines, different posting times. I know that's been very frustrating for you to try and pinpoint when these numbers are actually going up. But, it does seem like everyone's sort of settling into this market a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. At least the lines are getting posted at a reasonable time. I mean, most books, right now, as we look at it, majority of the books have at least sides up. So, some books are getting more aggressive, putting out totals several days in advance instead of waiting until game day. So at least we have that. And I'll expect that as we further progress and you get more data, that sample size bigger, more data on these teams, maybe, it'll morely, resemble an FBS type of, release schedule, Monday, most of the books open up and whatnot. But I'll say, it's been frustrating. I am very confident that I can beat the closing line, even at the FCS level. I am very happy with my power ratings and my handicapping numbers. To put in perspective, I have made 27 bets so far. I know it sounds like a lot, but I made 27 bets and I have either gotten, whatever the closing number was or beaten it in 25 of the 27 bets. Only 2 times did the line move against me, and both times it was a half a point. So with that being said, I still, I'm below 50% right now. I had a winning week last week, but I'm still below 50%. So we'll see how long that can continue for me and see how much patience I have. But it's a very high variance market right now. And the results from last Saturday alone, I would go down in history. If it was just an FBS weekend, would go down in history. I mean, we had 20 games, and that's just a random set of 20 games. Not like 20 games where we had specifically 20 double-digit underdogs, but in a random set of 20 games to have 6 double-digit underdogs not cover the spread. But we're talking about winning the games. 5 of those 6 teams winning the games by double digits. I mean, that would take 3-4 weeks of an FBS regular schedule to have that amount of double-digit underdogs win outright. And we saw it in basically a 20-game set last weekend. Very high variance. Turnovers have been the main culprit, Adam, which, obviously turnovers is probably the most important statistic in football as far as correlation to covering a point spread. And it's just a lot of sloppy play. It'll get cleaned up. And I think that'll make the market a little bit less variance. But for me personally, it's just about surviving these next, last couple of weeks and this next week and maybe another week.
Well, of course, as we know, I mean, turnover is one of the hardest things to try and handicap,
Oh my
hardest things
God,
to
yeah.
predict, especially early on in a season here where, as you said, it's been kind of sloppy, to say the least. Interesting tweet you had yesterday when we're recording, but on Tuesday, favorites are 10-25 against the numbers so far.
Yeah, I mean, they were losing record prior to last week, but yeah, on last Saturday alone, this is incredible. I mean, underdogs went 16-4, 16-4 against the spread in one day. I mean, it's just remarkable. What do I attribute it to? Teams aren't polished. So, I mean, it's tough to lay double digits with the team if you're just not running on all cylinders. Again, very sloppy play, tough to lay double digits when you got a team it's tough to cover as it is, but covering double digits or more than a touchdown when you're turning it over 2-3 times becomes increasingly difficult. But, people will say, oh, parity, this and that. We'll see when it all shakes out. But and people are going to point towards North Dakota State losing. I think that's more of a North Dakota State problem than it is at the FCS level. But yeah, right now, if you're blindly betting the dogs, you're 25-10. I'd take that any day of the week and twice on Sunday.
No, absolutely. It's definitely, and of course, too, that is something that, I mean, that's going to regress to the mean. There's no.
Oh yeah.
That, especially as you said, as some of these teams that are in favorite roles kind of clean things up a little bit. And teams that are in favorite roles at this point in time are generally teams that, are good at this level.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you've got teams that were really awful that are all of a sudden favored, in such a strange season, such a strange format. So that is something I would expect some positive regression to the mean for the favorites. So, we'll see what happens in the marketplace. If you start seeing some of those favorites get shaded a little bit, just simply with the expectation of playing to their levels, the tide that raises all boats or whatever they say, favorites across the board should start doing better here as we go forward. What about a favorite coming up here on Thursday night? South Dakota and North Dakota. North Dakota 6.5, a little bit of extra juice. The numbers showing up here at DraftKings, 48.5 the total for this one. And again, I have to throw this out there. Recording on Wednesday afternoon, this line could very well be 7. It could be 6. I don't know by the time you hear it. But with what we're talking about currently, North Dakota 6.5 and 48.5 the total on the side here. Any thoughts on this standalone Thursday night game that I'm sure a lot of people will play just for the hell of it because it's on?
Yeah, so real quick, I will say it looked like the early markets did short a lot of the favorites this week. So even though underdogs have been increasingly, obviously been the play so far, I thought, I had a lot of favorite bets that I made so far. So I'm not overwhelmingly, the underdogs being so successful so far is not scaring me to bet whatever my number says. So I did bet more favorites than dogs so far this week. And I think right now, as it stands on Wednesday afternoon, I see more value on the favorites than the dogs. Speaking of that, this game, I would certainly lean towards North Dakota in this matchup. Obviously, shop around, pay that 7 being a very key number. If you can get 6.5 with extra juice, obviously I would, prefer that. But, I just like the spot here for North Dakota. It's their third straight home game, Adam, and South Dakota is playing on a short week, playing their second consecutive game on the road. And South Dakota last week, we talked about turnovers already. How about this? They were +6 in turnovers last week against an Illinois State team that I'm not a big fan of, and neither is the market so far this spring. And they still only won the game by 7. So I think South Dakota is a fit play against team. The reason why it's not a huge bet for me, I also think North Dakota is going to be a play against team. I mean, they have made national news for a couple of outright upset wins, including last week over South Dakota State that surprised me. Dive into the box scores. The finals of those two games, very misleading to what the stats actually said. North Dakota's, very favorable to be at 2-0 so far. So that's the only thing preventing me from making a big bet on North Dakota here. But I certainly think they're the right side because of the situational spot.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if the line, is kind of indicative of that for their upcoming games, where both of these teams, as you said, kind of play against teams out there in the marketplace. So, those are always fascinating things to follow. And Also too, with a market that is so inefficient right now, and again, we're talking about very significant line moves early on in the week. At the time these are posted at low limits, I'm sure people dive in again as the limits tend to increase. You're going to see those movements. So, if Brad Powers says both of these teams are fade teams, then you're likely to see money come in against them in their upcoming games. So go ahead and get out in front of that movement and then decide when the market settles in, if that's a position that you want to hold. And that is something that you and I talked about last week as well, Brad, of when you're getting your line value, are you just holding on to it, or are you playing back at it for a, full middle, partial middle, something like that? Those opportunities probably still present here for at least a couple more weeks.
Absolutely. Partial middle almost on everything, some full middle if the difference is great enough and it's right in between my actual number on the game. But almost every bet that I'm making, if it's moving through key numbers or moving enough points, I'm playing back almost everything. Because, as confident as I am, as far as me beating the closing line, I still, it's still the FCS. It's still my first go around as far as handicapping all these teams on a week in and week out basis. I mean, obviously I've handicapped these teams when they're facing FBS opposition in the past, but, and also when the playoffs get to it, but regular season FCS football, and with it being a very unique situation here, with it being played in the spring, am I as confident as I would be, week 5 in October on an FBS game with my number and my bet? No, I'm not. I just, I'm an open book here.
All right, so we move on from that game to Friday's standalone game here between Albany and New Hampshire. And, those teams from the Heartland are teams that a lot of people probably know. I mean, I think South Dakota played Kansas a couple years ago, maybe even beat them, if memory serves me correctly. People know North Dakota State. They know a lot of those teams in the heartland of the U.S. or down in the Southeast, the teams that wind up playing some of the SEC teams. You don't hear a whole hell of a lot about Albany and New Hampshire when it comes to, college football here. So anything stand out to you about this standalone Friday night game?
So they're both in the Colonial. Colonial's, if we were doing a Power 5 conference, comparing Power 5 group of 5 at the FCS level, the Colonial is a Power 5 conference. That's the same conference where James Madison is. This is one where I'm not going to be involved. This is the first game for both teams since November of 2019. So neither team's played so far in the spring. Neither team played, a couple games even last fall. A lot of unknown there. Both were winning teams back in 2019. Albany was a playoff team. They're typically, as a program, not a playoff caliber program. So, usually I like fading teams off historical highs. New Hampshire, if we're doing, a program over the last 5-10 years, would have a higher power rating. So, if it got to 3, Albany, a 3-point road favorite, I would play New Hampshire plus the 3, but right now with the line, Albany minus 1.5, no bet for me. And, let me give a shout out. Circa doesn't care what the line is. As far as, if a bunch of books are already out with a line, they'll come out with their own line on the game. I really give them credit for that. They have New Hampshire favored, and that's actually the team that I have favored in this game from a pure power ratings aspect. I mean, I don't have it 3 or anything, but I think New Hampshire should be maybe a 1 or 2 point favorite here.
All right, so let's jump ahead to Saturday then, and let's kind of jump around the card a little bit and sort of see if there are some games that you're looking at, maybe some that have already moved, maybe some that you anticipate some movement from. I feel like the first game on the board, Southern Illinois and Youngstown State, kind of a bigger game, kind of a game that some people would sort of know. Do you have a position in that one?
So usually I'd want to fade Southern Illinois. I mean, that was the team that, upset North Dakota State last week and ended the Bison's 39-game winning streak. But there was nothing fluky about that game. I mean, even though we've been talking turnovers and fluke and whatnot, Southern Illinois flat out beat North Dakota State. I mean, you go look at the box score. They dominated them, even in the trenches. So this is a Southern Illinois team that, had a bunch of turnovers in their game against North Dakota 2 weeks ago. So I think that's given them some slight value. And again, people are going to probably want to fade them this week. I don't. Even though it's got a lower total, it's on the road, they're off a big upset win, I can only look towards Southern Illinois here. I think they're a legit team. Youngstown State offensively, even though they played 2 really good defenses and North Dakota State and Northern Iowa so far. I mean, they are pitiful on the offense side of the ball. I don't expect them to have much success here. So Southern Illinois, I did bet them -7.
All right, as far as the rest of the card goes, kind of jumping around a little bit, like I said, anything that that you're looking at, anything you've played, anything you want to share with our listeners here for this week?
There's one team I kind of like Southeast Louisiana. It's 9.5 now. I think the number is going to close 10 or so, at least at 10, if not above it. They lost their game last week against Sam Houston State, but basically played up to expectation in that game. Sam Houston's going to be a really good team this year. McNeese, I got blown out at home, and I don't think McNeese is going to be a good team this year. Keep in mind, they were very fortunate to beat Tarleton in that opener a few weeks ago, getting a couple of late scores to force overtime, then getting completely outclassed last week. I think Southeast Louisiana in a bounce back spot. If you just want to play numbers, I expect that one to close at least 10 or higher. Southeast Louisiana be a decent bet at -9.5. Real quick, my favorite bet, even though it's moved through a key number, and that's the problem. I'll just full disclosure. If I make a max bet, and right now max bets for most places are like a dime, the line's going to move point and a half. That's not an ego. That's just a fact. Maybe I'll do a tutorial, a live Periscope or whatever, and just show you, one bet by old Brad Powers and the line's going to move. But in these games, so it's tough giving out exactly what I bet it at. But Southern Utah, it's now -3.5. I got it, at 2.5. They're a team that lost by a point last week. I thought they outplayed Northern Arizona on the road, should have won. And also understanding the market and watching moves. And Idaho State was actually a team I bet on last week. And the market also early in the week was, with me. It's one of the only times the market has eventually moved against me on one of my bets. And I thought it was a head fake. So Idaho State was like +20. That's what I bet it at. Got down to like 17 last week against Weber. And then a ton of money came in on Weber State. So I'm expecting, maybe it's pro Weber State money. We don't know for certain yet. Or maybe it was just that matchup, but money did come against Idaho State. And anytime I'm on the wrong end of closing line value, that certainly raises some red flags for me. So I think this line is going to continue to climb. Southern Utah -3.5 is probably my favorite bet on the board right now.
Yeah, and it's important to look for those context clues as well and kind of follow the market. And like you said, somebody in the know liked Weber State. So,
yep.
You kind of look at that and see how you can apply that to the following week. And sometimes observation, can be your best friend, especially in a market like this where, as you said, it is high variance. You are still trying to find your way, kind of figure things out and all of that. To your point about Southeastern Louisiana, I've got a buddy in the know who told me straight out up front, over is the way to go with this team. Last week, 43-38 against Sam Houston State. This week, that total for McNeese State and Southeastern Louisiana, I believe I saw it, 56.5, I think was the number. You said you make it 56, and the market's kind of in that range. But like I said, I got a trusted buddy of mine in the know who said that Southeastern Louisiana was an over team this season, and so far 1-for-1 on that call.
And I think it was the highest scoring game of the week. So certainly there was a bunch of lower scoring games, and to have that kind of performance. And keep in mind, coming into the season, I thought Sam Houston State's defense was one of the best at the FCS level. So the fact that Southeast Louisiana put 38 on that defense says a lot. So yeah, you got me. And keep in mind, I mean, you can study these teams left and right, but sometimes in these particular instances where the market doesn't have a lot of info, having a buddy or somebody kind of in the know, it can make all the difference in the world. So I could only, with you saying that and that coming true last week, and full disclosure, you told me before the game and I just didn't get around to betting it. But I could only look towards over in this game, even though it's right at my number.
So we got a good number of games here on Saturday, but we've also got some games on Sunday as well. And I'll be really curious to see what the betting handles kind of look like for this, where I know college basketball is in the spotlight, obviously, with it being the month of March, but the NBA is on hiatus. They finish up Thursday night, come back for the second half of the season, like March 10th or something like that. But I'll be really curious to see what kind of happens here with the FCS market. How much of a public influence do we see of people just playing these games because they're there and because they're, getting TV time and all of that. But I think it's especially true of Sunday, where you get a big Saturday college basketball card. Then on Sunday, you get some daytime football, which, we kind of miss that, not after not having that since really the conference championship games, and of course getting the Super Bowl in the evening time on Sunday. Was that February 7th or 5th, whatever it was. But we got some FCS football here on Sunday. Anything about that small slate of games? I think there's 7 of them on the board. Any of those that you played?
Well, no, there wasn't one, which is kind of surprising. But I would say the most interesting game of the entire week is Dixie State against New Mexico State, where New Mexico State's a 3.5, 4-point home favorite in this one. And, I said it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think it looks even worse a week after the fact. I bet New Mexico State 2 weeks ago at Pick'em. They closed a 5-point favorite, and they were humiliated against Tarleton State. It was a horrific performance. Tarleton State scored on their first 2 plays of the game, 75-yard touchdowns. So it was really bad. And what happened last week? Tarleton State lost to this Dixie State team. Dixie State hadn't played a game ever before at the Division II level. Tarleton State had 2 games under their belt, and Dixie State goes out as a 4-touchdown underdog and wins the game outright. Turnovers are a little bit of the issue, but they still outplayed Tarleton State. So I can tell you this, Dixie State, to me, it's tough getting a power rating on a team that's only played 1 game at the FCS level, and who knows what New Mexico State's going to bring. But if we're just going off past results so far from what we've seen in this very, last couple of weeks, small sample size of FCS action, I don't know how New Mexico State's favored. And that's so pathetic for an FBS team to possibly go 0-2 against 2 teams that had never even played at the FCS level before. If that does happen for New Mexico State, I don't care if they're playing backups. I don't care how many new players are on the roster. I don't care how many guys are hurt. That is just so pathetic. Where the fact where if I'm a leadership or I'm on a board of trustees, Adam, and I know I'm getting on my pulpit a little bit here, but I would seriously consider whether or not we want to be and playing big-time college football anymore. That's just me. So if I had to lean right now, it'd be Dixie State plus 3.5, plus 4.
Well, and of course, as we look at New Mexico State, and they will be returning to FBS play next year, at least, unless they get relegated to FCS or something like that. UTEP on August 28th. UTEP.
That's one of the first games, yeah. Yeah,
UTEP with maybe a good chance to win. November 13th, New Mexico State at Alabama. What is that number, like 70?
Yeah, you know what? Before I haven't, updated my New Mexico State power rating and plugged it into my schedule yet, but I had it at 65. If you take 5, I would downgrade New Mexico State 5 points after the Tarleton State game. So yeah, pure power rating would be exactly 70 points against Alabama. Now, is that what the line's going to be? No, it's probably going to be upper 50s. But you are in fact right on my exact number. It'd be 70 right now. We're just doing a power ratings difference, throwing in 2 points of home field advantage.
How awesome would that be to see a line of 70 in a college football game? And if anybody could do it, I guess it could be Alabama. I don't know if they'd be willing to run up the score like that.
Nah, Saban's not one of those types.
Oh, I would, but I'm an asshole. So
yeah, I would too. I want to beat up people as bad as they can. That's how I am.
Can you just sit there and imagine on November 27th? We're sitting there all after the Thanksgiving holiday. You got all these great games, and then UMass is laying 14.5 at New Mexico State or something.
I do have New Mexico State. Well, that one's closer to pick now. That's unbelievable. And if you wonder why Kentucky and Alabama and a lot of those SEC schools aren't at the top of my toughest strength of schedule ratings, it's because they're playing teams like New Mexico State and Massachusetts.
Man,
pathetic. New Mexico State right now is forget the FBS level. They're right now on a pure power rating. They're probably a bottom 15 or 20 FCS team.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It's how low do you go with a power rating for this team? Usually speaking, you and I are kind of in that 40 to 100 range before the season. kind of down around 35 now because of teams like UMass and New Mexico State. I mean, shit, we're down to like 30 to 100 now because New Mexico State and UMass are just that bad.
Yeah, I have broken in the last couple of years. I've never been, I think, lower than 35, and I've gotten UMass a couple of years ago. I got in the 20s. Bowling Green almost got there this year. Akron has been right around there. I mean, the bottom of the FBS level is as bad as it's ever been.
Well, and you've even gone, I think, to your highest point a few times in the last couple of seasons too, with teams like Alabama.
Yep. LSU. Yeah, the last two national champions are the two highest power rated teams I've ever had. And people are going to be like, oh, recency bias. Look at who these guys have played. I mean, both teams played like 6 or 7 top 10 teams, and they're destroying them. And let's just put an example. 20, 30 years ago, you're only playing 11 or 12 games. Now you're playing 15. And usually those extra 2, 3, 4 games that you're playing are against top flight competition. Your sample size is bigger. You're playing better opponents, and you're beating them by bigger scores. Of course I'm going to have you up there. And anybody who wants to tell me the 1995 Nebraska Cornhuskers running an option offense is better than an Alabama team from last year or the LSU team from 2019. I mean, I'd love to make a bet on that game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like fired up Brad Powers. I'm enjoying it. It sounds good. Maybe it's just because we're recording this in the afternoon instead of in the early morning hours for you. But I enjoy fired up on his soapbox, just going off Brad Powers. I'm enjoying it quite a bit, man.
Appreciate it. I'm capable of it. I'm pretty low key a lot, but you get me fired up. I mean, there's a reason why I take blood pressure medication. So let's put it that way.
Well, that's just an occupational hazard in this business, right?
Yeah. Eventually it's going to get you. You're going to lose your hair or something.
Absolutely.
For those of you who start off betting, you laugh at that now, but if you're doing it daily, come talk to me in 5 to 10 years.
All right, let's chat a little bit of college basketball here to kind of put a bow on things, just because, it's going on. It is March Madness. It's, certainly in the spotlight right now, whether it's conference tournaments or the tail end of the regular season here. And again, we got some overnight numbers we could talk about a little bit with regards to the Thursday card. A few big games, Texas, Oklahoma State, Baylor, but a lot of conferences, just not a ton going on at this point in time, just kind of jockeying for position for seeding for the conference tournament, or, those bubble teams trying to kind of build their resumes up a little bit. One thing that you mentioned to me before we started recording here, kind of going through what we were going to talk about, was you had kind of some teams you were looking to play on and some teams that you're looking to play against. So are those regular season factors, teams you're looking to fade in conference tournaments here? What's that all about?
The reason I thought about it, because the one play-on team's already, as we're recording this on Wednesday, one play-on team's already played, and it's St. Joe's, who's been battling injuries for a lot of their key guys all year. Specifically, their best player is a guy by the name of Ryan Daly, who missed a significant portion of the middle part of the season. He has returned the last 4 games for St. Joe's. They have won all 4 games. They've covered the spread in all 4. They pulled a couple of big-time outright upsets over Richmond and Dayton. Earlier today, they took some money, didn't matter. They still won and covered against LaSalle, and they're playing UMass tomorrow on Thursday. It'll be interesting once that number comes out. It'll probably be St. Joe's, an underdog of anywhere between, it already is out, and it's already shaded, I see. I would still lean with St. Joe's plus 2.5. I thought the number was going to be at least, 4. But I would lean St. Joe's, completely different team with their best player now in the lineup. And even though they're playing back-to-back days, I mean, that's a team, their overall season power rating as factored by a Ken Palm or a Bart Torvik is just not accurate. Completely different team in the last 4 games. So that's one of the play-on teams, Adam, St. Joe's.
Well, let's talk about this for a second here. And I'll try to get this show out early, as early as I can on Thursday, just to maybe give some immediate listeners a chance to get some thoughts there on that 1:00 tip-off. But St. Joe has already played in this conference tournament. As we talked about, they played on Wednesday, were victorious, did advance. They play a UMass team that did not play. And that conference tournament is interesting because it's played in Richmond, where Richmond and VCU are both located. So it's not like it's one of those neutral site games or anything like that. But I always think that's a really interesting angle for conference tournaments, of these teams that play in the first or in the second round, or maybe both, and they go to the quarterfinals and play a team that's cold, play a team that hasn't played yet.
Yeah.
And specifically, I think in those neutral settings, particularly the bigger venues, like an Enterprise Center in St. Louis for Arch Madness, or some of these buildings that seat 12, 14,000 people that might have 1,200 in them this year. I wonder how that's kind of priced, how that's sort of factored in, or if it is these teams that have had a chance to go out there and play already against these other teams that are just wound up tighter than a drum because this is their one shot. And that other team's already gotten some of those jitters out, and they're probably playing tight, because it's their first game.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And maybe you look for St. Joe's more first half in this particular instance because of what exactly you outlined there. But yeah, I'll say this, just if we're looking at conference tournament betting strategy, one of those strategies is I'm not afraid to, fire right back on that team that, won an earlier round. 2 games in 2 days isn't a big deal for me, especially the team got some momentum, and St. Joe's right now, it has a ton of momentum dating back to the regular season. It's, the third game in 3 days, depending on how big your bench is, and obviously 4 games in 4 days. That's where, you can have all the momentum in the world, but I kind of get reluctant to play on you because at sooner or later, those tired legs end up being a factor that maybe supersedes the momentum. But a lot of times the team, like you mentioned, already got the jitters out of the way, played in basically an empty arena. Maybe they're not struggling shooting with a unique backdrop, sort of say. I think looking towards those teams first half and obviously full game, it would be my preferred strategy. Not blindly betting it, but I do think there's, you'll be close to positive EV. And with St. Joe's, I think that's the case.
Well, and of course, too, you think about some of these low-seeded teams that maybe pull a couple of upsets, and then they're going to run into every year top teams. And in the first half, they hang around. It's tie, it's within a possession or two, something like that. They lose the second half by 25. It happens all the time. They get run off the floor in the second half. They get tired, or the better team just kind of gets it going. Or, obviously here too, unlike the regular season, this is it. When that game is over, if you lose, you are done. So you will see teams, as irritating as this is, fall down 12, fall down 14. These players just trying to do whatever they can to have a few more possessions of their college basketball careers or of their college basketball seasons. So you do get those second half blowouts. And I think derivative betting is a brilliant idea here in conference tournaments. And of course, the same things still apply that we always talk about. If a team goes 13-24 from 3 in the first game, and they're a 32% 3-point shooting team, probably regressing in the second game. So those factors come into play, especially turning around, playing the next day. Coaches make a much bigger difference at this time of the year because you don't have 3 days to practice the plays that you saw on film or any of that. Boom, you just turn around and you play the next day, and your coach better adjust on the fly or have a good game plan. There are a lot of things about conference tournaments that are just so fascinating to me and can be really good full game or derivative betting angles.
More reasons why I think you ask anybody that does multiple sports, and long timers and even some newcomers, the favorite betting week of the year in any sport is conference championship week, coming up here in the next 7 to 10 days in college basketball, because of all, the back-to-backs, the unique derivatives, motivational gaps and whatnot. The fact that, the spread a lot of times they're doing a better job now putting it overnights, but a lot of times these spreads get released, a couple hours before tip time on a game day with a bunch of them. So for all these reasons, it's a very fun time to be betting college basketball, even more so. I know everybody loves the first opening Thursday this year. It's Friday of the NCAA tournament. Give me these conference championship weeks. That's my preference.
No, I totally agree with you. Like I said, I think it's a hot take, maybe sacrilegious, but I do prefer from a betting standpoint on the 2 conference tournament weeks more than the NCAA tournament week. Watchability? Yeah, the NCAA tournament. Betting-wise, conference tournaments. And something else here too, and I don't know if maybe you have a play-on team that sort of fits this thought process that I'm about to share here. You already mentioned St. Joe's being one of them, but I think about the Houston Astros, and I think about their regular season last year. They went 29-31. A bunch of guys were injured. Not only did they deal with a lot of injuries and a lot of attrition to the roster, I think they also dealt with not giving a shit-itis. It was a team that had been so good so many years in a row, a couple World Series appearances, won one. Now they're playing this gimmicky 60-game schedule. I'm not sure how much they cared. Then they got to the playoffs. They won the wild card round. They won the division series round. They were down 3-0 to the Rays in the ALCS, tied that series before losing game 7. They showed up when it really mattered. And I think that's an element to conference tournaments too, where you may get a team that underachieved badly, whether it's injury related, COVID related, whatever the case may be. They underachieved in the regular season, but you know damn well they're going to show up in this format. So I think there's always teams like that you can kind of look to as well.
Certainly, and a lot of the blue bloods have struggled so far this season, but we're starting to see some of those blue bloods turning around. Specifically, Kansas looks like, of all the blue bloods, a team that was really struggling there. They've gotten their act together with their, pretty much their only loss in their last 8 games was an overtime game that they just blew against Texas on the road. But they're playing as well as pretty much anybody, Kansas, and maybe it's just not the Big 12. Maybe take a flyer on a Kansas team like that, because they're certainly not going to be the favorite. Baylor's going to be the overwhelming favorite there, and we'll see where West Virginia, how they're priced. But that would be a team that looks like they're max motivated. Michigan State, it's March, it's Tom Izzo time, and they're playing like it, winning 4 of their last 5, really making a run towards the stretch here. That's another team, and I've talked about this team all the time. I think it's the best team in the Pac-12. They've only had 5 or 6 games this season where they've been completely healthy and had all their top 5 players in the lineup at the same time. But it's the Oregon Ducks, a team that's won 8 of their last 9 games. Only loss was on the road against USC, where they kind of got blitzed early. They had a bad first 5 to 10 minutes. But other than that, this is an Oregon team that I think is peaking, and I think you can make money in betting Oregon, even at this point, even after the market knows that they've been red hot. Dana Altman and company, not only the last couple of games of the regular season, but the Pac-12 tournament and the NCAA tournament, is a team that probably should be power rated in the top 20. And right now, if you're looking at the KenPom rating, are sitting closer to 40.
Yeah, and I think I can throw out a couple of teams here too. A team like Louisville, for example. Louisville is a very young team. They don't have a lot of upperclassmen leadership. Lots and lots of freshmen and sophomores getting tons of minutes for this team. But you've got an outstanding head coach in Chris Mack.
Yep.
And, this is a Louisville team that, they came off a long COVID pause, got crushed by North Carolina, then a couple of nice wins against Notre Dame and Duke. And you can kind of see in that Duke win where they won in overtime 80-73, a young team growing up, a team with a lot of poise, a Duke team that was making a push to get, back onto the bubble, back in that tournament discussion. And then this young Louisville team knocks them off. So a team like Louisville, I think, going into the ACC tournament, that's maybe a little bit of a play-on team with a good head coach, a young and hungry team, a team that is going to get back into rhythm now after a bit of a COVID pause. Another one could potentially be a team like Providence, another good, experienced, quality March coach, at least recently, in Ed Cooley. A team that's won 3 of its last 4. They've been playing better. They got a game against St. John's here later on after we finish recording here. We'll see what happens in that game. I could wind up looking bad right away before the show's even released. But a team like Providence is a team that they have a lot of upperclassmen. They have a good head coach. They've made some pretty nice runs in that Big East Conference tournament. Some coaches, just whether they know the right buttons to push or it's just a matter of the way that they develop players over the course of the season, something like that. I think you kind of want to look to play on those teams, those well-coached teams that maybe did fall short of expectations or maybe kind of showing signs of coming out of it as that conference tournament gets here.
And there's, a reason why, the cream rises to the top and certain coaches do better in the month of March. Tom Izzo being that one where I think it matters, certainly, because of all the unique situations that you're in come March compared to, other times of the year. So, yeah, another reason why I like conference tournaments is, is Providence going to make, an NCAA tournament? No, but I can make money with them in conference tournament week, even if they don't end up winning the conference championship. Maybe you can be a play on team, last couple games of the regular season, couple games during the conference tournament, but isolating those teams that, if they got the right guy at the top, you're not going to question motivation, sort of say.
Right. They're going to go down swinging. They're not going to go down with a whimper. They're going to go down swinging, and they're going to be out there, giving their best effort. At least that's coming, because there are some teams that will not care about the conference tournament. They will not care about their one-shot deal because they face such long odds to find a way to actually win this thing. And those teams, specifically the ones that are maybe a little bit poorly coached, they will quit. They will mail in the second half. And if you can isolate those, whether it's a derivative play or a live betting play, something like that, that's an opportunity for you as well. So we hit on a few play on teams. Were there any others that you had before we finished the show with a bit of pessimism?
Yeah, one team in particular, and we're going low to the well here, but Rio Grande Valley. It's a team that UT, you'll see, their prefixes a little bit, all over the board, but it's a team that's really been dealing with a lot of, I almost want to say tragedy. I mean, their head coach died a few weeks back. So, and on top of that they've had significant COVID pauses, and that now they just recently lost their top player. Their leading scorer left the team. This is a team that had a long COVID pause. They're only 1-4 since they came back in the middle of January for them. And on top of it, that only win was against a non-Division I team. So they haven't shown much since they've come back. Unfortunately, they've lost their coach. They've lost their best player. You're not going to get a lot of opportunities to play against Rio Grande Valley. But I think this weekend, Tarleton State, in a game where Rio Grande Valley is probably going to be listed as the favorite, I think there's a really good chance for covering the spread that they lose both games to Tarleton State. So that's meets the definition. A, B, C, check of a team I do not want to play on.
Yeah, Rio Grande Valley was a team I talked about fading twice last weekend. They were at Utah Valley for back-to-back, of course, playing in the elevation. They lost the first game by 4. They were very competitive, very close game. Lost the second game by 9, failed to cover both of them, then get blown out by New Mexico State. So, yeah, that is over. It certainly does seem like maybe they rally, at home here in these last 2 games, and I hope that they do. No offense to you if you play Tarleton State. But, just to kind of have some semblance of a positive after, what they've kind of gone through. But, yeah, they would be a very, very tough bet to make, to say the least. Any other fade teams that you're looking at here?
Be careful with Bradley, a team that lost their top 2 scorers, and it looks like their number 3 scorer, Henry, got hurt in their latest game. That is a Thursday game against Southern Illinois. Good chance that Bradley's going to be maybe favored in that game, a real short favorite. I want to fade Bradley. I think season's over for them. Another team that looks like they've just given up, Charlotte. They've lost 6 in a row. I think, turn out the lights, the party's over for them. Yeah, South Florida, same thing with them. They got a couple of their top players have been questionable and have actually missed their last couple of games. Pittsburgh is a team lost 2 starters via transfer. I don't want anything to do with Pitt, even though they just beat Wake Forest the other night. I think that they're kind of a fade team. South Dakota lost one of their top players. I think they're kind of come tournament time, there'll be a fade team there. That's not South Dakota State. That's South Dakota. In Nebraska, it's a team I think that we'll see. The problem is they're playing like Iowa coming up on their next game, and they're going to be like a big time underdog. I'm not sure that I want to lay 16, 17 points with the Hawkeyes, but Nebraska's a team I don't want to play on.
Yeah, I think another fade team here would be New Mexico. I don't see a team like New Mexico really showing up here. I mean, they've had such a strange season. They've been playing their home games in a high school gymnasium, I think in El Paso. They burned me on February 22nd. They beat Air Force in the first game, followed that up by losing the second game by 7, a game that set offense back about 35 years. But that's a team in New Mexico. I mean, they've got 6 wins this year. 2 of them are against teams that are lower division. One of them is Dixie State, who's in, Division 1A for the first time. They beat San Jose State and Air Force, 2 just horrific teams. I don't think New Mexico really shows up for their conference tournament. And I think it is important, and you may pay some premiums to fade some of these teams, but I mean, if they're going to complete no-show, I mean, it's
And
kind of
pay enough
okay.
of a premium. Yeah, it's okay to pay a point or two if it's a complete no-show.
Yeah, and there will be those. So if you can isolate those teams here in conference tournaments and, look, I mean, you got to do your research. Doesn't mean you have to know a whole lot about the team, know their statistical profile inside and out or anything like that, but just you can look at some of these teams and just kind of see how they're limping toward the finish. And just, one of the things about bad teams, I guess this will be the final point we end on. We talk all the time about good teams being able to flip the switch, just like all of a sudden they can start caring. The problem is when you're a bad team and you've not been playing well, there is no switch to flip or there's no power connected to it. So if it's a team that's really bad and they look like they don't care, nothing is probably going to change in that conference tournament game.
No, I agree with that. Even though you're dangling that, if it's a one bid league, I don't see it more often than not usually. And especially this season, I think a lot of teams, it's been such a grind. It's been such a difficult year. I just think if you don't have it now, you're just never going to have it.
Lots of fun chatting on today's show with Brad Powers, professional bettor and handicapper over at bradpowersports.com. And what's the story over at the site right now, my friend?
Yeah, bradpowersports.com. You can check it out if you want college hoops, you want FCS, all the way through the FCS National Championship game in May. $79. You'll get daily picks, daily plays with college hoops, obviously weekly plays when it comes to the FCS, and that's daily VIP updates. So you're getting plays emails and plays every single day. Newsletter. I'll have my first newsletter coming out here in a couple weeks, giving you a first look at the FBS level as far as spring practices, early power ratings, schedules, and some teams to play on and to play against here early on in the process.
Yeah, I was going to say, we got to have a lot of spring games coming up here soon, right?
Yeah, we're not that far away, and it looks like a lot of teams are going to have it. I'm not sure how many people they're going to allow to come into the stadium and whatnot, but looking at the schedules, coming up in a couple of weeks, that they start kicking in, and the month of April is just jam-packed, probably 60 to 80 spring games in the month of April alone.
Well, there you go. That'll be something for you to watch and pay attention to and check out. So make sure you check out bradpowersports.com and follow Brad on Twitter at bradpowers and the number 7. Brad, was fun as always, man. Great stuff, great insight, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
There you go. There's Brad Powers again at Brad Powers and the number 7 on Twitter. bradpowersports.com is the website. Coming up on Friday, to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure yet. If they take care and finish the home improvements, maybe I'll have Kyle Hunter on Friday's show. If they don't, maybe I'll record something quickly myself. Maybe do the Bettors Box, talk some Major League Baseball things. I don't know, but we'll have a show on Friday, something for you to listen to. So it'll just be a surprise for you, I guess, at that point in time. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.